Hello, my name is Bronte and welcome to this video. So this video is going to help you find what's really going on under the surface of your children. You might see that they're experiencing some issues and problems, whether that's at school or in their friendships or even at home. And sometimes it can be really hard to find out what's really going on under the surface. They might be demonstrating some behaviours or habits, or perhaps it's their communication that you can see that there's a bit of a breakdown. But I want to remind you that the problems that they're having are stemming from their deficiency stories. So on the surface level, they'll be experiencing problems, but underneath they will be experiencing and identifying strongly with these deficiency stories. And underneath the deficiency stories, they have these core deficiency stories. So it works like this. So the core deficiency stories are like the roots of the tree. The deficiency stories are like the big branches of a tree, and the everyday problems, which is what's happening on the surface, is the smaller branches and the leaves and they're the situations and the problems, the behaviours, the relationships that you can see on the surface level. But what's really going on is the deficiency story. So the deficiency story is driving the root of the problem. So when you know how to help your child identify what's really lying under the surface, then you can help them to clear it so they can let go of believing that they are that deficiency story, and they can start to feel more peaceful, more at peace, more freer in themselves, more comfortable in who they are, feel more positive. You'll find that they'll feel a lot more connected with themselves, with you, with their support people around them. So whether that's family or friends, and then also the world around them. So here's just a recap on what some of the deficiency stories could be that your child is hearing inside their heads. So this is their negative sense of self or negative self-talk. So they may not say this verbally, but underneath the surface, they could be hearing these words like, I'm not good enough. These thoughts like, I'm not smart enough. I'm a loser. I'm shit. I'm crap. I'm stupid. I'm dumb. I'm boring. There's something wrong with me. I'm weak. I'm a failure. No one wants me. I can't trust anyone. It's not safe to say what I think. And so they may be aware of these thoughts that they're having, and they also may not be aware that they're having these thoughts. So over time, in my experience, I got more conscious of those deep-seated deficiency stories that I had within my negative sense of self, which is that web of deficiency stories. But as a 14-year-old, I would call myself a loser, or I saw myself as a loser because I was being teased at netball training every week. So I really strongly identified with those words, I'm a loser. So your child will have a story. So one of my children, he feels weird. It's not something that I've put on him. He's just come up with it himself. This year he started saying that he feels different and he's weird and he's stupid. So they're examples of deficiency stories. So just a bit of a recap on those. So here's just an example here of a team member laughing at you at training. So if you imagine that your child is this person in the corner, the bottom left corner, and she is going to soccer training and a team member laughs at her at training. So this is what's coming. This is actually very, very similar to my own experience at netball training. So she might have a thought here that she wants the floor to swallow her up, and she just wants to hide. She's feeling ashamed, and underneath that is this story that she's a loser. And perhaps the core deficiency story underneath that is, there's something wrong with me. I'm a loser, like I'm different. There's something wrong with me. So that's the core deficiency story that's driving perhaps this distaste for going to soccer training for this girl. So the boomerang is such a beautiful, direct, straightforward and simple technique that you can use with your child to help them and help you get to the bottom of what's really driving their problems in their little worlds. So a boomerang, if you don't know, here's my boomerang. And a boomerang is an ancient Aboriginal tool that comes from Australia that is used as, it's a hunting tool. And so what we do with a boomerang is we throw it in a very technical way that I've never been able to actually make it work and come right back. But when you throw it the right way, on the right angle, with the right speed, and then what happens is this boomerang will hit the target. So it could hit an animal, and then this boomerang can get it, actually, in the way that it's made, it comes back to you. So it goes out into the world and then it comes back to you. And so what the boomerang reflects in your child's scenario here is that whatever deficiency stories that they hold about themselves and that they identify with, that's what feedback they're going to get from life. So everything stems from within. And our deficiency stories and the way that we see ourselves, that reflects, and it reflects how we see the world, and it really is it's how we experience the world. So this belief system that your child has about themselves will be that's what they'll see in the world. So if they feel like they're a loser, then they will interpret and perceive different situations from that lens, from that light, that they are a loser. So they might be looking for feedback or evidence that will prove to them and give them more supported evidence for the fact that which is actually just their belief that they are a loser. So there is one question that you can use to help you and your child get to the root of what's actually causing their distress. They might be worried about going to school, and that will be driven by a deficiency story. Maybe they're having trouble with friendships. That will be driven by a deficiency story. Maybe they have a really strong habit and a compulsion to be on their phone all the time. That will be driven by a deficiency story. So the boomerang technique is to ask this question: what does that mean about you? So let's just imagine that your child is having trouble going to school, and the problem is that they don't want to go to school. And so when you're talking with your child, you want to slip in the way that you can this question: what does that mean about you? So when you open up the conversation and you're holding space for them, you're listening to them, you're really refraining from giving advice, it's like you're bringing a sense of care to the conversation, and you really want to kind of support and scaffold your child to be able to find what deficiency story is driving this problem about going to school. So you can ask your child this question: what does that mean about you? So you might need to find out a little bit more about the situation about school. So just ask, what's going on at school, and Perhaps they'll, like you could say, did something bad happen? Just to kind of hone in on the situation and the scenario. And then you can give them prompts, give them some background information about deficiency stories and say, look, we all have, and don't call them deficiency stories to them because that's a big word and they won't be able to relate to it. So you might just say, we all have negative thoughts about ourselves in our heads. Like sometimes I feel like I'm an idiot, or sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough. And so modeling that helps them realize that there's nothing wrong with them because they're feeling bad about themselves. It's actually a part of the human experience that we have this negative bias within us. So what you want to do is ask them. So if once you've given them some prior information about deficiency stories or negative stories, negative beliefs, and shared how you sometimes feel like you're not good enough, or that you're not smart enough, or whatever that deficiency story is for you. And then you can ask this question, well, this situation, this scenario that's happened at school, if that was to say something about you, like if that was to say something negative about you, what would that be? Like, and you can give examples. You could say, does it mean that you're silly? Does it mean that you're a failure? Does it mean that you're weak? And just keep that light, because we really want to keep it open for them to drop into themselves and hear what story, what thought they have within them. So we don't want this to be a learnt story. We want them to really tune in and find out, well, what is the deficiency story that I can hear in my mind? So that question is such a powerful question that you can ask your child. What does that mean about you? Or you could say, well, if that was to say something about you, what would that be? Or if that was to mean something about you, what would that be? And so you want to keep it light, you want to keep it conversational. So because sometimes children, they don't want to talk about this. So it's like you might just slip it in really quickly, or yeah, just keep it really casual and really light. And then, but at the same time, if they're really completely devastated, to actually voice that deficiency story can feel very painful for them, because they are experiencing it as if it's truth. So some beautiful co-regulation techniques like rubbing their back if they're open to it, or giving them a cuddle, that physical contact, that soothing contact can really support them in what is probably a very challenging time to face and accept that, well, I just feel horrible about myself. So that's the question to ask. The question is, what does that mean about you? Or what does that say about you? If that was to say something about you, what would that be? And that's the boomerang technique. And that technique is what is the question to ask to help you and your child get to the root of the problem, which is the deficiency story. So this question is something that I use regularly for myself and my own mental health. And it can be a beautiful guide that directs you and your child to really what's going on under the surface. And then once they know what this deficiency story is, then they can use techniques like simple inquiry to let it go and to process the feelings that go with that. So here's an example. So this boy here, his problem is that he failed his maths assignment, and his immediate thought is, I'm not telling anyone. So let's just say he did tell someone. Let's just say he did come out and tell you that he failed his maths assignment in casual conversation, but also in that space of holding space and listening attentively and deep listening without giving advice. You can ask, if that was to mean something about you, what would that be? And he might say, I'm shit at maths. And the core deficiency story here is I'm shit. So that means that if he's saying he's shit at maths, he could be saying that he's shit at art, or shit at relationships, or shit at working out money, or something else. So when it's a core deficiency story, just be open to the idea that he could be telling himself that he's shit in other areas of his life. Now, I want you to know that he doesn't need to be stuck with this thought forever. So when we use the killer bee inquiries, we can help our children to soften these deficiency stories and release them by using the techniques to hold a sense of compassion and acceptance and befriend the thoughts, befriend the mind, so they don't need to scream at us anymore, and they soften, release and fade away or dissolve. And then we come to the body and we show our children how to be with the feelings, the sensations in their bodies, in that compassionate and place of acceptance. And through that place of acceptance and surrender, the emotions can move through the body, soften, relax and clear. So this is why it's important to really help them to get to the root of the problem using the boomerang, using this question, so they can actually clear it and they can process this negative experience that they're having. It's really helping our children to see that they don't have to be defined by these stories, that they can actually experience and have these thoughts and have these feelings, but they don't have to hold on to them. So what the killer bee inquiry shows us is it shows us how to be human and how to feel a sense of peace while we're having these negative thoughts and feelings. And when we practice these techniques, the negative thoughts and feelings come and go a whole lot quicker, rather than us holding on to them, suppressing them, hiding them, but also living with them and being stuck with them. So another way that you can pose this question is, because sometimes a situation that your child is in may not actually, they may not be able to identify what it means about themselves. Maybe it's about something about life. Maybe they hate school, and so it's really saying something about life rather than themselves. So you can change the boomerang technique from what does that say about you to, well, what does that say about life? What if that was to say something about life, what would that be? Or if that was to mean something about life, what would that be? And I have an example of that. I was working with a 12-year-old who was having trouble with school, and she had some thoughts here. I've got it in front of me here. She had, she couldn't get through her work at school. She had, she said that the work was painful. She felt sick in the stomach. She said, I get in trouble, I get yelled at. And she said, school is painful. So when I asked her, what does that say about life? Her answer was, life is painful. And so that's what our children are experiencing. That's how they're seeing the world. That's their life experience, that in this moment, they are seeing life as painful. And so they have thoughts for that, and they have the feelings for that, and they're stuck in Velcro. So those thoughts and feelings are stuck, and they don't know how to get out of it. They're overwhelmed, and perhaps they're anxious and agitated about it. Perhaps they're withdrawing and retreating. So to help them identify, well, what does that say about life? You're actually helping them to get to the root of the problem. Life is painful. Maybe they've just decided that life is painful. And I want to add here that it's automatic. This is not something that they've chosen to decide about life. It's just their cognition. They've just decided, their mind has just decided that life is painful. And so what we want to do is give your children these tools so they can let go of that thought, let go of that idea, so they are free. And so they can choose something different. They can decide that actually life doesn't need to be painful. When we use these tools, we can feel a sense of compassion and love for life, and also love for themselves. Okay, so you as the parent can use this boomerang technique. So all of us, we all do use these techniques ourselves for our own mental health, but also to support our children. So you can ask this question yourself. You can use the boomerang. You can ask if your daughter is depressed, or if you have another problem, a different problem. Maybe your son is anxious or something different. You can ask yourself, what does that mean about me? What does that mean about me that my daughter's depressed? Or what does that say about me if my son is anxious? Or what does that mean about me if my child won't go to school? So, and underneath that, like when you actually ask yourself that question, and if you're having trouble finding the answer, use some natural rest. Practice a couple of minutes of natural rest, move into that quiet space where the nervous system is regulated. You're in that rest digest state, nervous system state. And you can just ask yourself, the fact that my daughter is depressed, what does that mean about me? And it's like intuitively, these words will rise, this deficiency story will rise to the surface. So it's more of an intuitive response rather than a busy, chattery, analytical response. It's like, well, it could be this, like an analytical response is like, well, it could be this story, or it could mean this, but I don't think it's that. That's all very chatty. What you want to move into is that place of natural rest, where you're inquisitive and you're curious and you're inquiring to see what deficiency story is rising within you. What does this say about me? And then once you know what that deficiency story is, you can take it to simple inquiry and process it. Let go of the thought and allow the emotion to move through the body. So then you're much more emotionally available to hold space for your child and what they're going through. And you don't want to abandon yourself. You and your experience is just as important as your child. So we're not abandoning ourselves as parents here. We're actually including ourselves. We're holding space for ourselves, and we're holding space for our child at the same time. So in this case, the problem is this mother, my daughter is depressed. She's got a bottle of wine next to her and she's thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to fix this? And I actually had a very similar experience to this. So my mum, when I had depression from the age of 14, my mum was like trying to fix me. She was like, she would say things like, what are we going to do with you? And I just felt like a hopeless case that no one could fix. That was what I always told myself. And so in this case, you could ask if you're, in this case, this woman here has asked this question, what does this mean about me that my daughter is depressed? And the deficiency story that rose up here is, I'm failing as a mother. Or it could be, I'm a failure. Or it could be, I'm a bad parent. Or it could be, I've done something wrong. But in this case, it's I'm failing as a mother. And the core deficiency story is I'm failing. So this mother here could be telling herself that she's failing in her relationship. She's failing in her career. She's failing with her health. She's failing as a parent. So see how our core deficiency stories can find ourselves, it can feed and drive problems in all different areas in our lives. So this is the value of coming to the core deficiency story. So we can get to the root of the problem and clear the root of the problem. It's like we're getting the poison from the roots rather than actually just chopping off all the horrible bits at the top. We're getting to the root of the problem so we can clear this. And so we all can feel freer, more calm, more at peace, lighter. We can feel our mental clarity is here. We're not overwhelmed or stressed. We enjoy life. So that's a question that you can ask yourself. What does that mean about me that my child is struggling? So just as a recap, the boomerang technique helps you and your child get to the root of the problem. And the question to ask is, what does that mean about me? Or what does that mean about life? Or when you're asking your child, what does that mean about you? Or what does that mean about life?